Hi, my name's Sheehan, and today I'd like to talk about Salome by Richard Strauss. I'd like to go through this incredibly famous, groundbreaking opera, exploring how it's put together, looking at some of the most important leitmotifs, as well as how the opera is structured overall. Now, Salome was Strauss's breakthrough in the opera world. When it was first performed on the 9th of December 1905, it just created a sensation and made Strauss a household name. He earned a fortune from the royalties, the publishing rights, but it gave Strauss a degree of notoriety. Salome is based on a story from the Gospels about Herod's wife, Herodias, demanding the head of John the Baptist after her daughter dances for Herod, the Tetrarch. This story inspired Oscar Wilde to write his play, and Strauss indeed decided to turn this into an opera. He took out a lot of the text. And the story really is just about this teenage girl, Salome, who is kind of unhinged with desire for Jochanaan, or John the Baptist, which is not reciprocated. And of course, famously at the end of the opera, she dances for Herod, and for payment, she asks for the head of John the Baptist, which she kisses. And this caused such a scandal at the time, and singers refused to act out the part of Salome, and that's not even considering the Dance of the Seven Veils, kind of an extended striptease really for Herod. So it's all kind of steamy stuff, of course tamed by today's standards, but back in the early 20th century it must have been truly shocking. Now, Salome is in one act, and the orchestration is just absolute genius. I mean, you just look at the score, and Strauss's command of every instrument is just writ large on every page. You even look at a part like the second violins. I was looking at that the other day. It's either going to be the best thing they'll play or a complete nightmare, whichever way you look at it, because it's just so wonderful that Strauss uses every part of the orchestra in such an equal way. The colours he uses, the effects, conjuring up this kind of very close, claustrophobic, exotic, kind of crepuscular atmosphere which permeates this opera. He even has a new instrument in there, the heckelphone, which is like this bass oboe. So listen out for that. Now, it's been described, like Electra, the opera after this, as a kind of extended stage tone poem. And you can kind of see that because it's quite a short opera. It's only about an hour and 40 minutes. It's in one act, but the act is divided into 4 scenes. And each of the scenes gets progressively longer. So the first scene is actually very short. The second scene's a bit longer. The third scene's quite a bit longer than that. And the fourth scene makes up over half the opera. That includes the Dance of the Seven Veils. And in between the scenes, there are these orchestral transitions, which are kind of like mini tone poems in their own right. There's just a very brief transition between the first and second scenes. The next one between the second and third scenes is a bit more involved. The transition between the third and fourth scenes is the most elaborate of them all. And of course, on top of this are the tissue of leitmotifs which run throughout the work, which of course is Wagnerian. Despite its modernism, there's still a lot of Wagner in this opera, but certainly Strauss is his own man by now. Now, I've put in the description below how each of the scenes are structured in terms of numbers and the structure of each number. The whole thing flows into the next. It's all kind of through composed, but I've managed to isolate those if you're interested. But really, the key to understanding this opera musically is just listening out for some key musical ideas, which help propel the action, a bit like Tristan or The Ring. There's no overture, and we go straight into this heady atmosphere of first century Judea. The Romans are in power, of course, but Herod is the tetrarch, this kind of puppet ruler, and he's having a banquet, and in this moonlit night outside the hall stands Narraboth, who's this young officer who is infatuated with Salome. Indeed, infatuation, kind of intense desire, lust, kind of limerence, pervades the whole work. Narraboth and Herod, of course, are infatuated by Salome, and Salome is infatuated by Jochanaan, who does not reciprocate. And the very opening of the opera, we hear perhaps the most important leitmotif of them all, which represents Salome herself, but I think also that idea of unreciprocated desire. We hear it on the clarinets. Let's hear this opening on a recording. Note the alternation between C sharp minor and C sharp major in that motif. It's, I think, telling because of the ups and downs of infatuation, the kind of depression, and then the exhilaration of perhaps some kind of contact or attention from the beloved. There's that uncertainty about that motif. Perhaps also, of course, reflects the unpredictable nature of Salome's psyche. After Narraboth's gushing over Salome, and while this banquet's being held with Herod, his wife Herodias, and Salome herself, some soldiers kind of comment on the political landscape of first century Judea. And we have this new idea, which I think is one of the motifs which represents the Jewish people. We then hear the voice of Jochanaan himself, who's imprisoned in this underground cistern in the dark, in the depths. And we hear him prophesying about Jesus Christ, whom he baptized earlier on in the Gospels, of course. And the music kind of settles down into a noble C major. Much of John the Baptist's music is in C major in this opera. And we have this. Representing the gulf spiritually between Jochanaan and Salome. There's a real wrench between her C sharp minor major and and Jochanaan's C major. Very stately utterance here, quite Wagnerian as well. The soldiers then comment on what he's saying, what he's prophesying about. They comment on who is this Jochanaan, who is this Baptist. And we hear this new idea, which will eventually, as the opera develops, we'll hear as another motif connected with John the Baptist. And we hear this other very short idea, which I think represents the Romans. You might be able to pick that out. Dum dum dum, dum dum dum. I think represents the Romans. Then we have a very brief transition with Narraboth and the page, which then takes us into scene 2, where we meet Salome for the first time. In scene 2, Salome leaves the banquet and she becomes intrigued by the utterances of this man of God kept underground. And this intrigue turns into a kind of obsession. And she eventually persuades Narraboth to retrieve him from his cell. Now we hear versions of her motif, the clarinet idea we heard right at the beginning of the work. But we hear a couple more in this scene as well. And one of them is what I describe as the freedom motif. It's this rather intoxicating waltz-like idea, which goes like this. We also hear another leitmotif, which I think is associated with Salome's obsession with Jochanaan. It's often heard in the bass instruments, with something like this. You recognise it by the triplet at the beginning. Now as Salome swans around, she hears the voice of Jochanaan from the pit, and she becomes ever more intrigued by this character who's criticising her mother for marrying her husband's brother. So she's thinking, who is this person who is bold enough to do this? And she becomes ever more drawn to him, intrigued by him. And one of these passages where Jochanaan prophesies doom, I think is really striking. It just shows how masterful Strauss was as an orchestrator. Listen to how dramatic this passage is. Wonderful, isn't it? And absolutely terrifying, that moment. We then have a leitmotif which represents the pit or the cistern where Jochanaan is imprisoned, and it's this rather dramatic idea full of tritones. We then have a second number, which is largely a duet between Salome and Narraboth, as she tries to persuade him to get Jochanaan up from the depths, and of course he's not supposed to do that, but he's besotted with her, and we hear perpetually that Salome obsession motif. Eventually, after some persuading, he gives in, and then we have this wonderful transition between the second and third scenes, where we hear this orchestral tapestry of all the ideas we've heard already, really, including a new one, which is another John the Baptist, another Jochanaan motif, and this one's associated with prophecy as well. We hear this. That really comes to the fore for the rest of the opera, and we just get a hint of that during this orchestral transition. In the third scene, Jochanaan is brought up from the pit, and we see him for the first time. And Salome just lusts after him. She tries to seduce him, but Jochanaan is not interested. He rejects her. He is solely interested in proclaiming Jesus Christ, whose ministry he is there to point towards. And at the end of the scene, Narraboth kills himself out of despair. At the beginning of this scene, when Jochanaan is brought out the pit, we hear this idea, which has been hinted at before, but we hear it in its full glory, and it goes like this. Kind of thing. Eventually we hear another very important leitmotif connected with Salome, and that's her lust, and that goes something like this. As the opera progresses, this motif becomes darker. We hear it in a minor mode. Particularly as John the Baptist, Jochanaan, rejects her advances. We also hear this other idea, which again is to do with Salome's desire for Jochanaan. Whilst Salome tries to seduce Jochanaan by waxing lyrical about his body and then his hair and then his mouth, each time he rejects her, the music gets more frenzied and more passionate. And the number 3 is quite important in this opera. She kind of tries to seduce him 3 times. She's rejected 3 times. A bit later on, Herod does a similar thing, which he tries to woo Salome 3 times, and she rejects him 3 times. There's an interesting symmetry there. I mean, some of the music's so sublime here. When she goes on about his mouth, I mean, the way that opens is just absolutely beautiful and intoxicating. I'll just play you a clip now. I mean, that's just awesome, isn't it? It's just incredible stuff. So, John the Baptist, Jochanaan rejects her 3 times. And after his 3rd rejection, we hear a new, incredibly important idea, which is Salome saying, do you know what, I'm going to kiss your mouth whether you like it or not. And of course she certainly does at the end of the opera. And this is the kiss idea, which goes like this. So listen out for that, because it appears everywhere from now on in this opera, including in Salome's final monologue, when she finally gets her way. In the midst of this passion, Jochanaan sings about Jesus, and the music is suddenly in this very calm D-flat major, a real balm from the kind of heady intoxication of the surrounding passages. And there's this lovely violin solo here as well. Etc. Kind of a moment of repose, a moment of calm. We come to this great climax where Jochanaan curses Salome, and we're reminded of the prophecy motive. We're reminded of the kiss motive. And we go into the final and greatest transition. And here this infatuation has turned sour. It now has a far darker, destructive quality to it. And that lust idea in fortissimo in the first violins, C sharp minor. Etc. Then we have and in this transition we hear this crashing climax. It sounds like Götterdämmerung. It goes like this. Did you hear how just then as well two of the Jochanaan motifs are combined? Da-dum, da-dum, dum, da-dum, da-dum, dum. And over the top the prophecy one. Da, 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 da. Terrific stuff. Then the music dies away and we hear this contrabassoon solo playing a variant on Salome's main motif, but by now it's very twisted. And we hear this kind of call to arms in the bassoons. First we have one bassoon, then two bassoons, then three bassoons. And then we are into the final scene where we meet Herod and Herodias for the first time. In the fourth and final scene, things come to a head, quite literally in this opera. And Salome, rejected by Jochanaan, now faces the advances of her somewhat creepy uncle Herod, the Tetrarch. And he comes on the scene, he slips on Narraboth's blood, and he is this crazy, freaky, power-crazed individual. And we hear that kind of That Jewish motif we heard right at the beginning of the opera, to herald him, that kind of thing. And then we hear his motif, which is basically a whole tone scale. And you kind of hear that in various guises when he's on the scene. Herod is also under the spell of Jochanaan. He is kind of somewhat fearful of his prophecies, and we hear this wind motif, like the wind of doom. It's your kind of typical storm music, isn't it? And as that progresses, we begin to hear the bum, 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 the prophecy music, which is associated with John the Baptist. Now, Herod is sexually obsessed with Salome. He's desperate for her to dance for him. And first of all, he calls her to drink with him. This is the kind of the part of the opera which is symmetrical to, which I mentioned earlier, which is symmetrical to Jochanaan's rejection of Salome. This time Salome is rejecting Herod. He tries to seduce her 3 times. First of all, he wants her to drink with him, and she rejects him. We hear this kind of waltz-like music, which is a representative of Salome's lips. He then offers her this this wonderful fruit, and we hear this new motif, which represents fruit, which I think sounds rather kind of Tin Pan Alley-ish. It kind of sounds like something you'd find in, I don't know, New York 20 or 30 years later. After Herod's rejected, much to the delight of Herodias, his wife, we hear Jochanaan's prophesying again the downfall of Herod and his family. And Herod and Herodias discuss who this prophet is, what it might mean for them. And the Jewish clerics get involved now. And we have this scene, highly contrapuntal, where I think it's 5 Jews give their opinions on Jochanaan, who he is, and what he is saying. Is he the prophet Elijah? There's another Jewish motif here. Here's a clip. And then Jochanaan again prophesies about Jesus, and this time he's joined by 2 Nazarenes, 2 disciples of Jesus, and we have again this moment of calm and repose. The music very similar to Jochanaan's meditation on Jesus from scene 3. It's a real kind of again an oasis of calm in this tempestuous music. Sure enough, Jochanaan starts to criticise the Judean royal family again. Remember, he's really got it in for Herodias. And in response, we hear Herodias' laugh. We now come to the bit where Herod is imploring Salome to dance for him. He's absolutely crazed with lust at this point. And he has this melody here. There's this kind of expressionistic waltz feel to this music here. After Salome's promised anything she would wish to perform this dance, she eventually agrees. And this is where we hear the famous dance of the seven veils. Famously, Maria Wittig, who sang Salome at its premiere, she said she refused to do this dance or kiss the severed head at the end because she was a decent woman. But you know, it's such a great orchestral showpiece, you know, and of course it's often performed by itself. Basically, it's a dance of seduction, and traditionally, as the dance progresses, Salome reveals more of her body. Musically, it's actually fairly simple in terms of its melodic interest. I mean, of course, the orchestration is exotic and elaborate as you'd expect, but there's two main themes really in it, and you can see a breakdown of the form in the description below. After a hair-raising introduction, the music settles down and we hear this main idea. We hear this on the violas. And on the oboe, of course, we hear this. Etc. So it's a bit like Ravel's Bolero. It's kind of got this hypnotic effect, this music, and it just repeats and repeats. We have these gorgeous alternations of chords as well. Have a listen to this. We hear this sinuous variation on the main melody as well. We then have my absolute favourite moment in the dance for seven veils, and actually it's probably my favourite moment of the whole opera actually. We have this absolutely gorgeous melody. Just love that music. I just think it's so stirring, so wonderful. So once the dance of the seven veils is over, Salome tells Herod what she really wants, which is the head of John the Baptist. And Herod, of course, does everything in his power not to grant her her wish, but no, she's determined to get what she wants. And throughout this music, we hear that lust motif. And we hear Salome repeat the same thing. It gets more elaborate every time, saying she wants the head of John the Baptist. Den Kopf de Jochanaan. And again, this is a bit like the, we talked to threes before, didn't we? The threes of Salome's attempted seduction of Jochanaan, and then the threes of Herod's attempted seduction of Salome. And now we have the three reiterations of Salome's desire for Jochanaan's severed head. And throughout this passage we hear a motif of Herod's pleading with Salome. And for British listeners, perhaps it might remind you a bit of Edward Elgar. despite the promises of silver, precious jewels, even the veil of the temple. And here where the Jews are in uproar because it's the absolute blasphemy, the biggest blasphemy Herod could utter. We're reminded of their tune. Remember from the argument before. Herod, of course, finally agrees, and an executioner is sent down to the pit to behead Jochanaan. We hear this extraordinary passage as the executioner goes down to do his grim task. What the horns play there reminds me a bit of the magic fire music from The Ring. As the executioner finally beheads Jochanaan, we hear this very high, strained double bass playing this B flat, almost as if his head is being sawn off. Like that, a bit like Psycho. So listen out for that. It's kind of really effective piece of orchestration. The double bass, right, very high. It's got that strained sound to it. We're then into the extraordinary closing pages of Salome, where she has this extended kind of mad scene or monologue with the head of John the Baptist in front of her. And of course, it's here she fulfills her wish, kissing him on the lips. And you know, it's just extraordinary. You're just going to have to listen to it. Perhaps chief amongst the ideas we hear are the twisted lust idea, but this time in the minor mode. And of course we have the kiss idea. As you'd expect, her lust is fulfilled in this rather depraved way by kissing the lips of the decapitated Jochanaan. It's right at the very end of the opera that Herod realises how insane she is and orders her to be crushed by his soldiers' shields. And that's how the opera ends. So Salome, if you don't know it, it's definitely an opera to study, and you know there's so much of interest in there, so many fertile ideas which are developed and extended and come back in different guises, and the orchestration is just sublime, and it's just a gripping piece of music theatre and rightfully revered as one of the true touchstones of 20th century Western art music. So thanks for watching this video. If there's anything you'd like me to look at in the future, please put them in the comments and I'll try and get around to everything eventually. And please click like and subscribe, and thanks very much. Bye.